In a conference room filled with executives, my father-in-law, the CEO of the company, locked eyes with me and declared, "You're terminated. Your performance is unsatisfactory." That same evening, my husband, Leo, pushed a list of local shelters toward me on our kitchen counter and muttered, "This is where we part ways." I left without a word. Just days later, both he and his father were blowing up my phone with 82 missed calls. Frantic after they figured out who I really was, I thought the worst moment of my day was being fired by my own father-in-law, in a room full of witnesses, before being escorted from the building as if I were a common criminal. But then, I got home. I found my husband Leo at our kitchen island, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. He slid it across the marble countertop without even looking at me. It was a printed list of women's shelters in the city. Each entry was highlighted in bright yellow, and one was circled with a handwritten note in his distinct script. "Closest to the bus station. Now that you're unemployed," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "This arrangement just doesn't work for me anymore." I stood there, clutching that piece of paper, the chilling realization washing over me that I had been completely set up. They had planned this together. The father and son duo, working in tandem to discard me like some unsatisfactory quarterly report that failed to meet their projections. But what they had no idea about was that I had been making plans of my own. Before we go any further, thank you for joining me to hear these stories of strength and rebirth. If you feel that skill and hard work should be valued, regardless of who you are, please think about subscribing. It's completely free and it ensures these stories can empower more people who need to hear them. Now, let's get back to what unfolded, but I'm jumping ahead. For you to truly grasp how I wound up holding a list of homeless shelters as my marriage fell apart before my very eyes, you need to understand the care I'd taken to construct the life that was now being demolished. It all began 3 years prior at a cybersecurity summit in Seattle, back when I was an independent consultant and my future felt like it was entirely mine to shape. Leo Vance was in the back of the auditorium during my keynote speech on predictive threat modeling, and he was actually taking notes. That detail alone set him apart. Most of the attendees at these events were just there for the catered lunch and networking, endlessly scrolling on their phones as speakers talked about encryption standards. But Leo was different. He was leaning forward, his pen flying across a notepad as I laid out my framework for identifying system vulnerabilities before hackers even knew they were there. When the QA session started, he put his hand up and asked a question that proved he had been genuinely listening, something about scaling the architecture across distributed networks without causing latency. It was a deeply technical question that most of the marketing execs in the room couldn't even pretend to understand. After the event, he waited patiently as a few other consultants tried to push their business cards on me. Then he walked up with a smile that felt authentic, not practiced. We ended up talking for 2 hours in the hotel cafe. He was representing Vance Dynamics, his family's company, but he talked about it with a certain detachment, as if he understood the business but wasn't consumed by it. He asked smart questions about my research, offered his own insights on gaps in the market, and he listened, truly listened, as I theorized about the future of the industry. When he asked for my number, it felt strictly professional. When he called me 3 days later and asked me to dinner, it felt like a new possibility. Our courtship developed with what I then saw as a respectful pace. Leo introduced me to his world in stages. First, there were casual dinners. Then came a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands, where we hiked and talked about everything but our jobs. After that, he slowly integrated me into his circle of college friends and business partners. He was never pushy, always making sure I was comfortable with every step we took. At the time, his patience felt like a sign of deep respect. Looking back, I can see it for what it was, an evaluation. Each stage was a test, a new hurdle to see if I would fit into the carefully designated box he had already prepared for me. 6 months after that conference, Leo brought me back to the same Seattle hotel where we'd first connected. It was the same cafe, but a very different conversation he proposed over coffee, not champagne, wearing jeans, not a suit, and the ring he offered was elegant, but not flashy. The entire proposal felt so real, like he understood that I was someone who valued substance over show, a true partnership over a spectacle. I said yes without hesitation, completely convinced I had found a partner who saw me as an equal, not as some new asset to be acquired. My mother's response was like a storm warning I chose to ignore. When I called to share the news, there was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "That's wonderful, Ava," she finally said, her words carefully chosen. "Just always remember that families like the Vances play by a different set of rules than we do. You'll always be on the outside looking in, no matter what Leo promises you." I brushed off her warning as the cynicism of her generation, the worldview of a woman who had fought for every dollar her entire life and couldn't fathom that wealth and merit could coexist. Leo had promised me over and over that his father, Arthur, respected expertise and results above all else. He said Arthur had built his company by finding talent, regardless of where it came from. I believed Leo, because to do otherwise would mean admitting I was walking into something far more treacherous than just a marriage. Our wedding took place 8 months later. The ceremony seemed to reflect my personal taste. Elegant but simple, intimate rather than a grand spectacle. It was only much later that I realized how many of my choices had been gently guided by Leo's suggestions, his family's expectations cleverly disguised as my own preferences. I kept my maiden name, Sterling, for my professional life, a choice Leo publicly supported. Meanwhile, his mother, Eleanor, made little passive-aggressive comments about tradition and family unity at every chance she got. I saw Leo's public support as a sign of his modern thinking, proof that he was different from his father's generation. I see now it was just another performance. He was giving me the illusion of independence while the walls of my new life were being built around me with invisible ink. Just 2 months after we were married, Arthur Vance called me into his office at Vance Dynamics. The building itself was designed to be imposing. It was all sharp angles of glass and steel, with a lobby ceiling that soared 3 stories high and security that required you to badge through 5 separate checkpoints just to get to the executive wing. Arthur's corner office had a panoramic view of the city. It was furnished with a desk big enough to land a helicopter on and chairs that were strategically positioned to make visitors look up at him, whether they wanted to or not. He motioned for me to sit in the lower of the 2 visitor chairs, a power move so blatant it was almost a cliché. "Ava," he started, using my first name with a casual familiarity that felt like a privilege he was taking, not one I had granted. "Leo tells me you're one of the sharpest minds in cybersecurity. We could really use your skills on our team." He said it as if he were granting me a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just fulfilling a family duty to give his new daughter-in-law a job that was visible, but contained. The role was for a mid-level systems analyst. It involved maintaining their current security systems and running routine checks. The salary was 30% less than what I had been making as an independent consultant, a detail Arthur mentioned with the clear expectation that I'd understand that joining the family came with certain financial sacrifices. The job itself sounded boring, but Arthur presented it as a chance to prove myself and move up. Leo had urged me to take it when we discussed it the night before. He framed it as an investment in our marriage. It meant stable hours, no more travel to client sites across the country, and the chance to actually build a life together. Instead of living by my consulting schedule, his reasoning seemed sound on the surface. I convinced myself the pay cut was only temporary, that I would quickly prove my worth and earn a promotion based on merit. I believed working at my father-in-law's company would ultimately open doors, not close them. I took the job the next day, officially joining Vance Dynamics as both the CEO's daughter-in-law and an employee with a relevant, if overlooked, skill set. The truth of the job became apparent within my first week. Arthur assigned me to maintenance tasks that a decent intern could have managed, updating firewall rules from vendor manuals and running security audits on systems I could have completely redesigned to be far more secure and efficient. Whenever I submitted proposals for infrastructure upgrades that would have saved the company a fortune while massively improving their security, they were met with polite nods before disappearing into a filing cabinet never to be spoken of again. In team meetings, my suggestions were met with the kind of patronizing patience you give to a child who doesn't yet grasp how the real world works. It became clear I wasn't there to actually contribute. I was there to fill a role. The company had hired me as a showpiece, a credential they could point to when they talked about their commitment to diversity in the tech industry. Look at us, we even have the CEO's daughter-in-law working as a systems analyst. See how modern and fair we are. The irony of being both overqualified for my tasks and completely ignored for my actual expertise was not lost on me, but I told myself it was just for a little while. I would prove my worth, earn their respect, and move up based on my results. I was naive enough to think that performance would eventually matter more than politics. 6 months of that professional suffocation led me to start working on something in secret. Late at night, after the office had cleared out and only the cleaning crew remained, I began designing a new security framework on my personal laptop. I stored everything on encrypted cloud servers that had absolutely no connection to Vance Dynamics. I named it the Aegis Framework, an architecture built on predictive threat analysis instead of reactive defense, using pattern recognition algorithms I had been developing throughout my consulting career. Every single component was meticulously documented and patented under my maiden name through a limited liability company I registered in Delaware, Sterling Guard Systems. It was a shell company that existed only on paper and in the digital architecture I was building, one line of code at a time. Leo never questioned why I was staying so late at the office. Arthur never asked what I might be working on beyond my simple maintenance duties. They both operated under the comfortable belief that I was just trying to prove myself, putting in extra hours to earn the acceptance of a family and a company that had so graciously welcomed me. What they completely failed to grasp was that I had given up on seeking their acceptance long ago. I was building myself an escape hatch, creating something that belonged only to me in a world where everything else felt like it was slowly being taken away. The strange thing is, I wasn't plotting revenge at that point. I was just being careful. I was protecting my intellectual property from people who had already shown they didn't value my contributions. I was creating an insurance policy against a future I couldn't quite see, but somehow felt was coming. Around the time of our first anniversary, the marriage itself began to quietly unravel. Leo started checking his phone obsessively at dinner, stepping out to take calls from his father that couldn't possibly wait. When I'd ask him about his day, his answers grew vague and distracted, offering no real detail about what was taking up so much of his time. He stopped asking about my work altogether. Our conversations shrank to simple logistics: whose turn it was to buy groceries, which bills were due, whether we had plans for the weekend. I tried everything I could think of to bring back what we once had. I planned elaborate date nights that he would cancel at the last minute for some unexplained work emergency. I suggested weekend trips that never happened because Arthur needed him for some meeting or strategy session. I tried to talk about our future, the life we had always said we would build together, and I would watch his eyes glaze over as if he were mentally making a grocery list, just waiting for me to finish talking. Family dinners at the Vance estate became a form of torture disguised as tradition. Eleanor, Arthur's wife and Leo's mother, had mastered the art of the subtle insult delivered with a polite smile. She would make comments about my clothes that implied I didn't understand how to dress professionally, ask questions about my career goals phrased to suggest that ambition in a Vance wife was unladylike, and make pointed inquiries about when I was going to provide grandchildren, as if my primary purpose was purely biological. Leo would sit through these dinners in complete silence, methodically cutting his steak, never once defending me or trying to redirect his mother's barbs. His silence was complicity. It was his agreement expressed through inaction. Late at night, lying in bed next to a man who felt more and more like a stranger, I would stare at the ceiling and try to pinpoint the exact moment everything had started to change. But there was no single moment. It was a slow, relentless erosion, like water wearing away at stone until the foundation developed cracks too deep to ever be repaired. The life I thought I had built with Leo Vance, I was starting to realize had been built on borrowed land. I just didn't know how soon the lease was about to expire. The elevator ride to the executive floor that Tuesday morning felt different, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. I had received an email the day before, short and deliberately vague. Performance Evaluation Quarterly Review. Your presence is required. Conference Room B, 8:30 a.m. The wording was strange. I'd been in dozens of quarterly reviews, and they were always team presentations, collaborative assessments of the whole division's metrics, but I brushed off the feeling of unease and prepared meticulously. I compiled 3 years of data into a presentation that documented every success, every breach I'd prevented, every dollar I'd saved. I arrived at 8:15, 15 minutes early as usual, holding my tablet loaded with charts and graphs that told an undeniable story of success. The numbers were irrefutable. My division had stopped 3 major security breaches in the last year alone, any one of which could have cost the company millions. We had exceeded our performance targets by 42%. Client satisfaction scores had climbed steadily under my leadership. I had personally designed and implemented security protocols that were now being used as case studies in industry journals. I walked into that conference room feeling confident, maybe even a little proud. I had every right to expect recognition, maybe even a promotion. The conference room felt like it was set to an Arctic temperature, though the thermostat probably read a normal 70 degrees. Cold, in certain situations, has nothing to do with the temperature. Arthur was sitting at the head of the table in his usual power position, but the people on either side of him made my stomach drop. There was Marcus from operations, a man I'd spoken to maybe twice in 3 years. Next to him was a woman in a dark suit I didn't recognize at all, holding a legal pad with the poised posture of someone whose job was to witness and document things precisely. No one from my team was there. Not a single person who could back up my work, speak to the actual data, or offer any sort of counter-narrative to whatever was about to happen. I should have turned around and walked out right then. The ambush was so obvious in retrospect. I was isolated, outnumbered, and facing people who had no direct knowledge of my contributions and no reason to acknowledge them. But I was still operating under the naive assumption that facts mattered, that documentation and evidence would speak for themselves. I took a seat across from Arthur and placed my tablet on the table, ready to present the truth in the form of cold, hard data. Arthur didn't smile. He didn't offer me coffee or make any small talk. He just shuffled a stack of papers with a theatrical slowness, each movement deliberate, designed to make me wait and feel the weight of my own uncertainty. When he finally looked up, his voice had the smooth, practiced tone of someone who has delivered bad news many times and has long since stopped feeling anything about it. "Ava," he began, using my first name with a familiarity that felt all wrong in this context, clinical and detached. "We've been reviewing your division's performance metrics. Unfortunately, the results are not meeting our expectations or the standards we have for leadership positions within this company." The words hit me one by one before they formed a coherent meaning. Performance metrics, not meeting expectations, standards for leadership. For a second, I thought he was talking about someone else's division, that there had been some clerical error and I was in the wrong meeting. But then I saw the look on his face, not apologetic, not uncomfortable, but satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl. And I understood with a sudden, terrible clarity that this was exactly the meeting I was meant to be in. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But last quarter's numbers exceeded every projection by a significant margin. We beat targets by 42% across the board. The security upgrades I implemented saved the company an estimated $4 million in potential breach damages. Client satisfaction scores have improved by 28% since I took over. I reached for my tablet, my fingers automatically moving to pull up the spreadsheets and charts I'd prepared. A visual representation of undeniable success. Arthur didn't even glance at the screen. He just smiled, and that expression made something cold settle deep in my chest. I'd seen that smile before. It was the smile of someone who had already won, who knew that facts and evidence were meaningless when you held the power to simply decide the outcome. "This isn't personal, Ava. It's just business." He delivered the line with the casual confidence of a man who'd used it many times before, a convenient phrase to absolve him of all responsibility. The absurdity of it was almost impressive. How could firing someone based on fabricated performance be anything but personal? But I saw the truth in his eyes. The calculation, the predetermined outcome, the absolute certainty that he controlled the situation completely. He slid an envelope across the table with the same theatrical precision. My full name was typed on the front in a formal business font, Miss Ava Sterling, not Ava Vance, which I had never legally become, but which family members sometimes use Sterling. The use of my maiden name felt deliberate, a subtle declaration that I had never truly been one of them. "Your termination is effective immediately," Arthur continued, his tone suggesting he was reading from a script. "Security will escort you to your desk to retrieve your personal belongings. Your access credentials will be deactivated at 9 o'clock this morning. Human Resources will contact you regarding your final paycheck." The lawyer, because that's obviously what the unknown woman was, made a careful note on her legal pad, documenting every word. Marcus still wouldn't meet my eyes, staring at a spot on the wall just past my shoulder. I sat there, holding the envelope containing my termination letter, understanding that this had never been about my performance. This was about power and control. I had become too competent, too visible, too successful in ways that reflected well on me instead of him. My division was being praised in industry journals. Clients were specifically requesting to work with my team. Other companies had started reaching out to me with subtle inquiries about leadership positions. I had thought those were signs of success. What I failed to understand was that to someone like Arthur, my success was a threat. My visibility was a challenge. My growing reputation was something to be eliminated before it could outshine his own. I stood up slowly, picking up the termination letter with hands that somehow didn't shake. The adrenaline was pumping, but the physical reaction would come later. Right now, I was on autopilot, some deeper part of my brain taking over to navigate the immediate crisis. "I know the way out," I said quietly, looking directly at Arthur, holding his gaze until he was the one who looked away. "It's the same path I used when I built half the systems that are currently keeping this company afloat. The systems that stopped those 3 breaches, the infrastructure that's generating the revenue that pays for this conference room and your imported coffee and whatever satisfaction you're getting from this." For a split second, his expression flickered, something that might have been uncertainty or the dawning realization that he had perhaps miscalculated something important. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had executed his plan flawlessly. I gathered my personal items under the watchful eye of a security guard named Mitchell, a man I had personally trained on our new access protocols 6 months earlier. He wouldn't look at me either as he stood 3 feet away, a reluctant witness to my humiliation. I packed my coffee mug with its chipped handle, the framed photo of my mother from my college graduation, and a small succulent plant that had somehow managed to survive for 2 years in an office with recycled air. The objects that had made my workspace feel like my own were now just evidence of my temporary status, easily packed into a cardboard box and carried away. My security badge felt heavy as I dropped it in the return tray at the lobby desk. Angela, the receptionist I'd chatted with every morning for 2 years, couldn't meet my eyes. Neither could the junior developers I'd mentored, or Peterson from IT, who stood watching from the hallway with a horrified expression of someone watching a car crash. They all knew. Everyone in that building understood, even if they would never say it out loud, that poor results was corporate speak for, "We're getting rid of you before you become too powerful." The drive home was surreal. Traffic moved at its normal pace, people going about their ordinary days, completely oblivious to the fact that my professional life had just been systematically destroyed. I drove on autopilot, my mind cycling through a useless loop of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. Why now? What had triggered this? The numbers were undeniable, unless that was precisely the problem. Maybe I had become too successful, too visible, a threat to Arthur's narrative that he was the sole genius behind Vance Dynamics. I thought about calling my mother, but I could already hear her voice, saying the very thing she'd warned me about 3 years ago. I thought about calling Chloe, my best friend since college. But what would I even say? That I'd been fired for being too good at my job? It sounded insane, even in my own head. As I pulled into the garage of our downtown loft, a new fear began to crystallize beneath the shock I would have to tell Leo that his father had fired me. Would he defend me? Would he demand answers from Arthur? Or would he... The thought trailed off as I stepped into the elevator, but some part of me already knew the answer. Some part of me had known for months, had seen all the small warning signs I'd been deliberately ignoring because facing them was too painful. I walked to our apartment door, keys in hand, dread settling in my stomach like a cold, heavy stone. I knew, before I even opened that door, some deep instinct had already read the room and prepared me for what was coming. I just hadn't imagined it would be this brutal. The key turned in the lock, and I pushed open the door, expecting an empty, silent apartment. Instead, I found Leo sitting at our kitchen island, positioned as if he were an actor on a stage, waiting for his cue. His posture was too casual, too prepared. He had no look of surprise that his wife was home hours earlier than expected. A glass of whiskey sat in front of him, even though it was barely 10:30 in the morning. His laptop was open, angled just enough for me to see real estate listings on the screen. 1-bedroom apartments, spaces designed for a man living alone. He was dressed in a dark blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, the one he said made him feel confident. He looked completely calm while my world was still on fire. "You're home early," he said. His tone held no surprise, no concern, just a flat acknowledgement. There was no question about why I was home, no inquiry into what might be wrong, nothing that suggested he didn't already know exactly what had happened. I set the cardboard box with my office belongings on the counter between us. That pathetic little container holding a coffee mug, a photo, and a plant. It made a hollow thud on the marble. "Your father fired me," I said, watching his face for any flicker of genuine reaction. He cited poor results. Funny thing, my results were actually the best in company history, 42% above target. 3 major breaches prevented $4 million saved, but apparently that's not good enough. Leo took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey. I saw something shift in his expression. Not guilt, not shock, just a kind of resigned finality. The look of someone who was relieved that this moment had finally arrived so he could move on. He reached into an expensive leather portfolio next to his laptop and slid a folded piece of paper across the counter toward me. The gesture was practiced, not spontaneous. He had prepared this. I picked up the paper, my hand starting to tremble as the adrenaline from the meeting with Arthur finally caught up with me. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It was a printed list of women's shelters in the city, 6 of them arranged by neighborhood, with addresses and phone numbers. Each one was highlighted in yellow. One was circled in blue pen with a handwritten note in Leo's angular script. Closest to the bus station. He'd even researched public transit access. The cruelty of it was breathtaking in its precision. It wasn't just abandonment, it was abandonment with a transit map. "Now that you're unemployed," Leo said, his voice as dispassionate as if he were on a conference call, "this arrangement doesn't work for me anymore. I need someone who can contribute. Someone who's on the way up, not on the way down." The words landed like physical blows. This man, my husband, was talking about our marriage. Like it was a business partnership that had failed to generate a return on investment. I was being judged on the same cold metrics as a quarterly earnings report, and I had been found wanting. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. The answer was written in every detail of this staged moment. His slight nod confirmed it. "Dad told me last week he was planning to restructure your division. I figured it was time for us both to prepare for new chapters. It just seemed like the practical thing to do, restructure." The euphemism was almost beautiful in its cowardice. I looked down at the shelter list, then around at the apartment we had furnished together. The art on the walls I had chosen, the bookshelf where my technical manuals sat next to his business biographies. "You think I need this list?" I asked quietly, holding up the paper that had become the most insulting object I had ever touched. He shrugged, a casual dismissive gesture. "I'm just being practical. You don't have family money to fall back on. You'll need somewhere to stay while you figure things out." I thought it would be helpful. The assumption was staggering, that I was helpless without him and his family's money, that I had nothing of my own, no value independent of the Vance name. He had actually convinced himself that this list was a kindness. I stood there, and the full architecture of their betrayal snapped into place in my mind with devastating clarity. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a coordinated strategy between father and son. Arthur had told Leo a week ago. For 7 days, Leo had known his father was going to fire me, and that he himself was going to end our marriage, and he had said nothing. He'd continued to play the part of a loving husband, all while holding this secret like a weapon. How many nights had he lain in bed next to me, planning this exit? I thought about the gradual cooling of his affection, his increasing absences. It wasn't the natural evolution of a relationship. It was strategic divestment. He had been slowly pulling away, insulating himself from the fallout he knew was coming. And for months, I had blamed myself. I'd auditioned desperately for a role that had already been recast. The shame of that realization burned hotter than the anger. I had been so thoroughly managed, and I had participated in my own deception because I wanted so badly to believe this marriage was real. "I'll be gone by morning," I said, my voice pulled from some reserve of dignity I didn't know I still possessed. Leo actually looked relieved. He had probably expected tears and arguments. My calm acceptance was the best possible outcome for him. He didn't see what was happening inside me. It wasn't just rage or grief. What crystallized in my chest was something colder and more precise: clarity, sharp-edged and absolute, cutting through every illusion I'd held about who these people were and what I had meant to them. I packed methodically that night while Leo stayed in the living room, probably scrolling through those real estate listings. I didn't take everything. I took only what was truly mine: my laptop, which held 3 years of work, my backup drives, innocuously labeled, and the external hard drive hidden in the back of my closet, which contained every patent filing, every line of code, and all documentation related to Sterling Guard systems. I left the jewelry, the designer clothes, all the trappings of the life I'd been auditioning for. What Leo and Arthur didn't know was that I wasn't Ava Sterling, a struggling, unemployed tech worker facing homelessness. I was Ava Sterling, founder and sole patent holder of the security architecture that powered every single significant system at Vance Dynamics. They thought they had fired a mere employee and discarded an inconvenient wife. What they had actually done was terminate their license agreement with the architect who had built the very foundation their company stood on. And that license, with its carefully worded renewal clauses, was about to expire. I left the apartment before dawn, carrying 2 suitcases and the box from my office. I drove downtown to a mid-range hotel, paid cash for a week, and requested a room on an upper floor with good Wi-Fi. Room 847 became my new base of operations. The space was generic, but I didn't care. I spread my laptop and backup drives across the desk and pulled up the licensing agreements I'd drafted 2 years ago when Vance Dynamics first acquired what they thought was my security framework. The Aegis framework, which powered all their major security systems, had never been theirs. They had licensed it from Sterling Guard Systems, the shell company I'd registered in Delaware to protect my intellectual property. The license agreement was 37 pages of dense legal and technical language that Arthur's lawyers had clearly skimmed, assuming it was standard boilerplate. They were catastrophically wrong. Buried in Section 12, subsection D, was a clause I'd written with extreme care. It gave me unilateral termination rights in the event of a material breach of good faith dealing with the intellectual property creator. Section 19 explicitly defined that creator as the entity holding the primary patents, which was me and only me. The license renewal date was in 72 hours. Without my explicit approval, their entire security infrastructure would begin to experience cascading failures. I sat in that hotel room, reviewing the documents until my eyes burned. Then I began to draft the formal notice. At 2:15 in the morning, I finalized the text. It was brief and professional. Pursuant to Section 12, D of License Agreement, MT2847, Sterling Guard Systems hereby provides notice of material breach regarding treatment of the intellectual property. Creator automatic license renewal is suspended pending contract renegotiation. This suspension becomes effective at 0600 hours, Eastern Standard Time, September 24th. I attached a PDF of the original agreement with key provisions highlighted in yellow, the same color Leo had used on the shelter list. The symmetry felt right. I scheduled the email to be sent at 6 a.m. to Vance Dynamics Legal Department, copying Arthur and Peterson, the head of IT. Then I did one more thing. I accessed the back-end admin panel of the Aegis framework using credentials Arthur never knew existed. With a few keystrokes, I suspended the automatic license renewal. The systems wouldn't crash immediately. That would be sabotage. Instead, they would begin to experience what would seem like random authentication failures. Client portals would lag. Internal comms would flag false threats. It would be like a building with a crumbling foundation, slow at first, then impossible to ignore. I closed my laptop, set an alarm, and finally fell into an exhausted sleep. The first call came at 6:47 a.m. from Arthur's office. I watched it ring, then go to voicemail 3 minutes later. Another call from a different Vance Dynamics number. Then Leo's personal cell, which I'd already blocked. Arthur's personal cell, declined. Peterson from IT, declined. By noon, my phone showed 28 missed calls and a flood of increasingly desperate texts. They started professionally. "Ava, we need to discuss some technical issues." Then the facade cracked. "This is urgent, please respond immediately." Then all pretense vanished. "Whatever this is about, we can work it out. Just call me back." Finally, a message from Arthur himself arrived just after 11:30. "Name your price." As if this were just about money, as if the right number on a check could make this all go away. The assumption in those 3 words told me everything about how little he understood. I let them sweat for 3 days. It wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. I needed them to fully comprehend their dependence on the systems I had built. I needed them to call in outside consultants who would stare, bewildered, at code that was brilliant but impenetrable. Without the documentation that only I possessed, I needed Arthur to squirm in emergency board meetings, trying to explain why the company's core advantage was vanishing, and I needed time to field the other calls that were starting to come in, the good ones, from companies who'd heard whispers that something was happening at Vance Dynamics and that the architect behind their system might suddenly be available. On the second night, I finally called my mother. "Ava, baby, where are you?" she asked, relief flooding her voice. "Leo's been calling me, saying you left, that he's worried." "I need you to listen, Mom," I said, and something in my tone made her go silent. I told her everything. The fake firing, the shelter list, the betrayal, and the license agreement they'd never bothered to read. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said something that broke through the careful control I'd been maintaining. "I have $48,000 in savings. It's yours, if you need it." My mother, who'd raised me alone, working double shifts as a nurse for 15 years to put me through college debt-free, she was offering me her entire life savings. "Mom, I don't need," I started, but she cut me off. "I know you don't need it. You never have, but I need you to know you have it. You're not alone, baby. You never were." I broke then, not from sadness, but from a mix of gratitude, rage, and fierce determination. Tears I hadn't let myself shed finally came. "I'm going to make them understand what they did," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you are," she said with absolute certainty. "And I'll be here when you do." That conversation changed everything. This wasn't just about my hurt feelings anymore. It was for my mother, who never had the luxury of demanding fair treatment. For every woman who'd ever been told she was nothing without a man. For everyone who'd ever been discarded like a problem to be solved. The calls from Vance Dynamics continued, eventually exceeding 100. But I didn't answer. On the fourth morning, I woke at 5:30. A new clarity settled in my mind. I drafted an email to Arthur's private address. No greeting, just a single sentence. "Please find attached documentation regarding the ownership and licensing structure of the security systems currently powering Vance Dynamics." The first attachment was the full license agreement for the Aegis Protocol, with sections 12D, 19, and 23 all highlighted in yellow. The second attachment was every single patent filing I had submitted over the past 3 years, each registered to Sterling Guard Systems with my maiden name as the sole inventor. At the bottom of the email, I added one final line. "You fired the architect, the building is noticing." I hit send at exactly 6 a.m. My phone rang at 7:14. It was Arthur's private cell. I let it ring 4 times before answering. There was a pause, and then he said, "We need to meet, face to face." "No," I said, my voice calm and level. "You need to listen. 3 years ago, you hired me as a favor to your son. You treated me like a diversity checkbox. You assigned me work that was beneath my capabilities and never bothered to learn what I was actually building. 2 years ago, when you needed a new security system, I provided the solution through a licensing agreement your lawyers never read. You thought you were buying technology. You were renting it from me." "That's not," Arthur started, but I cut him off. "The license renewal came due 3 days ago. I declined it. Every system keeping your company operational is now on borrowed time. It all traces back to the woman you fired for poor results that were actually the best in company history." There was a long, heavy silence. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, uncertain. "What do you want, Ava?" The question showed how little he still understood. He tried to recover, shifting into negotiation mode. "We can offer you reinstatement, vice president level, equity, whatever it takes." "I don't want to work for you, Arthur," I said, and I meant it completely. "I want you to understand that what you destroyed wasn't just a job." I could hear him breathing heavily. "The licensing agreement can be terminated with 30 days' notice," I continued, letting the implications sink in, "or it can be renegotiated. That would require a formal acknowledgement of material breach, which means board minutes recording that you fired your chief security architect based on fabricated issues. It means explaining to your investors why the foundation of your company belonged to someone else. It means acknowledging, publicly, what you did. You're trying to destroy the company, he said, anger creeping back into his voice. No, I corrected him firmly. I'm teaching you the cost of underestimation. The question isn't whether the company can survive this, it's whether you can. I ended the call. The industry moved fast. My inbox filled with messages. 2 companies reached out with VP-level offers that same day. Another wanted to discuss acquiring Sterling Guard systems I had been invisible for 3 years. Now the entire industry was scrambling to understand how I had built something so essential. By that evening, I had 3 formal job offers, each paying more than double what Vance had. I accepted the most prestigious offer before midnight from a company called Apex Innovations, feeling a line being drawn between what had been and what would come next. 6 weeks later, news broke that Vance Dynamics was restructuring. Arthur had agreed to a temporary administrative leave. The stock dropped 18% before trading was halted. Chloe called me, laughing. An emergency board meeting went for 7 hours. Arthur had to explain the whole thing. 2 board members resigned on the spot. Leo started calling again. His voicemails grew progressively more desperate. The first was angry. You're destroying something my father spent his life building. The second was confused. Can we just talk, figure this out? By the third, he was panicked. Dad's under investigation. Is this what you wanted? To humiliate him? On week 8, he appeared at my new office building, holding a bouquet of expensive roses. The confidence he used to wear like a second skin was gone, security called up. Miss Sterling, a Leo Vance is here to see you. Says he's your husband. We're separated, I heard him say to the guard on the camera feed. The word choice was so typical of him, sanitizing the deliberate cruelty of what he'd done. No, I told security. Tell him I'm in a meeting, he can try calling. I watched on the monitor as he left the flowers on the reception desk and walked out, his shoulders hunched. My new position at Apex Innovations was everything Vance Dynamics was not. It was collaborative, respectful, and valued competence over politics. 2 months after my termination, we launched Aegis Framework 2.0 at a major tech conference. My name was front and center. I saw representatives from Vance's former clients in the audience, taking furious notes. Within 3 weeks, 4 of them had requested proposals to switch their infrastructure to us. The market was voting with contracts, and they were choosing the architect over the company that had discarded her. That night, a colleague, Clara, asked me, "Do you feel satisfied?" Watching them implode. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the word got caught in my throat. The truth was more complicated. I felt vindicated, but satisfaction wasn't the right word. What I'd truly wanted wasn't revenge, it was recognition. It was for Arthur to see my talent, and for Leo to love me for who I was, not how I fit into his life. That was something I would never get from them. It's not about satisfaction, I finally told Clara. It's about building something they can't take away. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from Arthur. It was an apology, startling in its honesty. He admitted he had been scared of my talent, that he saw my brilliance as a threat to his own narrative. He asked to meet. We met at a cafe. He looked smaller, diminished. He didn't ask for anything. He just apologized and acknowledged the damage was beyond repair. 2 weeks later, Leo showed up at my apartment. "I don't expect forgiveness," he started, "but I think we could start over, just us." "There is no just us, Leo," I said quietly. "There never was. When you handed me that shelter list, you showed me exactly who you are when loving someone becomes inconvenient. That's foundational character. You don't start over from that." After those conversations, I sent 2 final emails, one to Arthur, establishing a strictly professional relationship, the other to Leo, making it clear that the answer was no and that the trust was gone forever. I hit send on both and felt a release. Closure wasn't about forgiveness. It was about deciding the story was finished. 6 months after leaving Vance, Sterling Guard Systems, which I co-founded with Clara, was a thriving company. We built it on principles of collaboration and respect, even starting a fellowship program for women who had left toxic workplaces. My mother flew in for our office expansion opening, her eyes filled with tears. "Your father would have been so proud," she said, but then she added, "I taught you how to survive, Ava. You taught yourself how to build, that's all you." At my best friend Chloe's wedding, a year to the day I was fired, I realized I was genuinely happy. Later, a young engineer we hired, Maya, who had been fired for being not a cultural fit, asked me how I did it. "I stopped waiting for permission to be valuable," I told her, "and I stopped building things for people who treated my contributions like favors." 6 months after that, Maya was leading a team that landed our biggest contract yet. Driving home that night, I passed the Vance Dynamics building and felt nothing but mild curiosity. Henry had retired. Leo had moved to the West Coast for a fresh start. Their empire had shrunk. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free because I had learned the most important lesson. The best response to being erased isn't destruction. It's building something so undeniably your own that they become irrelevant footnotes in a story they never had the right to narrate. I went inside my own apartment, opened my laptop, and began to review proposals for the next phase of our expansion, because that's what architects do. We build. If this story of strategic justice and quiet triumph had you captivated from that first boardroom betrayal to Ava's ultimate success, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Ava suspended the license renewal and watched 82 desperate calls pile up while she calmly drank her coffee. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of resilience and redemption like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.